Now I did it too much, and my throat is sore now. Great.
I think we can slowly start. I'm actually very glad to welcome you on the first event of this year's Zagreb Film Festival Industry program. The whole program will take place online. Actually, on the beginning, I would like to thank our partners who helped us in this merge to online, which is Radio 808 and Hub 385. As you probably all know, we are usually bringing great film and gaming experts to Croatia, and our events are usually held in crowded cinemas and crowded venues. So this year we truly need to thank our partners because we are new in this, and I hope everything will go smoothly. Actually, today we will start our first event with Cornelia Geppert, who is a creative director of Jo-Mei Games, and her colleague Patrick Lerman, a producer at the company. And actually they will lead us into video games monster design based on human emotions, which will bring closer their latest project called Sea of Solitude, which is a game based on human emotions, mostly on emotion of loneliness. This game actually was a huge success, published by industry giant Electronic Arts. At this moment, I would also like to thank our partners on this project, which is Digitelling, French Institute in Croatia, Goethe Institute in Croatia, Academy of Dramatic Arts, and Edu4 Games. At this moment, I will also ask you to send questions on our YouTube channel, and I will leave the floor, the window to Cornelia.
Okay, I hope you can hear me, guys. Hello, hello, hello. I will switch now to my presentation. And I hope this is working. Yes, so hello. I will talk about Sea of Solitude, and the presentation is, as mentioned before, monster design based on human emotions. Okay. My name is Connie, or Cornelia Geppert, but everybody calls me Connie, and I'm the writer, creative and art director of my games company called Jo-Mei. I started my career 20 years ago already as a comic artist for a monthly comic magazine in Berlin. After working in the animation industry for a while, I finally arrived in the games industry where I work now for 15 years. I started as a concept artist and level designer, and I soon grew into the position of an art director. 10 years ago, I finally started my own studio, as I often had issues with the decisions and design ideas of my former bosses. And I often thought I could maybe do it all better. So, of course, that didn't entirely came true, but finally being able to realize my crazy game ideas, like making my own mistakes and learn from them and grow as an individual artist and a team player still makes me like grateful, like every day to have my very own awesome little bunch of people to make games as art. My company is called Jo-Mei, as mentioned, and we are 12 people and an independent studio based in Berlin. Today, as I mentioned, I will talk about SOS, and it's Sea of Solitude, short SOS. And it is the most ambitious personal project we ever created. It is also our first console title and our first story-driven game. So it's so many firsts we had with Sea of Solitude. Beforehand, we created rather small free-to-play games for browser and mobile, which was interestingly like one of the most important aspects for our company to be able to create the big world of Sea of Solitude with just this tiny team, this 12 people. Learning from the free-to-play games how to develop complex 3D browser games which had so many constraints, like a 3D model could only have up to 300 triangles or limited texture space, etc. So we needed to learn to fake and get the maximum out of limitations. So this is why the whole way we went through with our studio led us to do Sea of Solitude. Sea of Solitude, as I mentioned, also called SOS, was released in July, on July 5th in 2019, last year, and the reaction of fans had been overwhelming. Many of them claimed that it changed their life for the better. The biggest achievement has been the official invitation to do a TED Talk about the story of Sea of Solitude, which I'm still like stunned that this really happened. It's amazing still for me. And Sea of Solitude is in the core about a young woman named Kay, who suffers from such strong loneliness that her inner feelings, the darkness, the anger, the feeling of hopelessness turn to the outside, and she becomes a monster. The game is about finding out why this happened to her and how to turn her back into a human. The premise, the core of our game is when humans get too lonely, they turn into monsters. So this is what happened to Kay. In certain situations, when we are feeling lonely or our self-hate increases, we see ourselves as monsters. Means we feel as not being part of society anymore, rather being someone who doesn't know how to function as a proper human being, while everyone else seems to be easily living their life and know how to live their life. But we, in with Sea of Solitude, we not only show how people see themselves who suffer or who struggle with loneliness, but also how outsiders, friends, and family see those who struggle. In SOS, we show a whole family. In Sea of Solitude, we show a whole family. Kay, the main character, her brother, her parents, and her boyfriend. Everyone struggles with one specific type of loneliness, affecting themselves, but also the people around them. The goal for every one of them and Kay is to become human again. In each level, we show one of those arcs. Already in late 2013, I started to come up with the first ideas of Sea of Solitude. Back in the days, I felt more and more unhappy creating the free-to-play games I mentioned beforehand, as I always wanted to make meaningful art. And by then, I rather did the opposite. I mean, I tried to put as much heart as possible in all our games, but nearly no one of the players was interested in reading my deep stories in a free-to-play game. The great part was that those games gave us a great stable income, but it didn't fulfill me as an artist, like not at all. What was missing by then was a life. I'm sorry. Yeah, it didn't fulfill me. So I started writing the idea of Sea of Solitude already in 2013, as I mentioned. But surprisingly, when I look back now, the first concept was more about a flooded post-apocalyptic setting and a huge Pokemon-like creatures you needed to collect. So it was rather a shallow concept back in the days. I mean, because of the free-to-play games we created, I needed to transition to this deep, artful games. So it was like this interesting in-between concept, still with some like more shallow aspects, I will call it. So what was missing by then was a life-changing experience that arrived in early 2014. I got into a new relationship that at first seemed perfect, like so much love, and soon I was talking with a man about marriage, and it was all great. But after how to change myself to make everything good again. So that time was not only pain, like not only the painful start to the the most positive change in my private life, but also the bomb that let me finally express myself artistically in a way that I always wanted. But it was also the biggest hurdle for our game, for Sea of Solitude, as I literally lived through some of the pain that we tell now in Sea of Solitude. So I created the game while I lived through that, through the story. That it was really intense time. So while in this immense pain during that emotional abusive time, the Pokemon creatures you needed to catch in the early Sea of Solitude concept changed to huge black monsters filled with meaning, pain, and desires. The post-apocalyptic setting at the world I wrote at the beginning changed to a deeply metaphorical, empty city flooded by an ocean of tears. The tears of the main character, Kay, who desperately wants to change her situation. Our game is basically broken down into two stories. The arc of Kay, which is full of subtle depiction of mental health issues, and on the other side, the arcs of the family members, which is told in a more explicit way in order to communicate our messages more clearly. My main goal was to create an adventure which you could enjoy without the meaningful stories of loneliness behind it. I love huge monsters. I love huge monster stories. I love post-apocalyptic setting. I love water, as I'm a fisherman's daughter who grew up on the shore. With all these ingredients of my life, of my actual life, we started to create our by now most successful game, Sea of Solitude. First, let's start talking about Kay. Let's talk about her many metaphors and her arc in Sea of Solitude. The whole design of SOS is actually portraying how I imagined the world would look like if emotions would manifest in real physical world. Everything in SOS centers around Kay. We portray her as ripped apart into some of her core emotions: willpower, joy, hope, self-doubt, and self-destruction. Throughout the game, you meet each of those emotions as monstrous manifestations and some other elements. By interacting with them, they step by step change, and at the end of the game, you bring all of them to a healthier state, and they are able to melt to one whole person again, the human K. Everything in the game, the order of the events, when you meet each monsters, elements you need to interact with, and so on, is a story of a person's life figuring out about their own shortcomings, the will to change, and the hurdles they need to overcome to finally become more content with themselves. Like not only chasing for positive emotions, but being with being with and embracing even negative feelings too. Surprisingly, that concept came easily to me already at the start of the deeper concept of Sea of Solitude. I love the idea to manifest the inner dialogue of someone into real life. The problem had been that I had so much to say. I had so many ideas I wanted to like shed light onto. I had so many ideas I wanted to tell. So boiling the whole script down, scaling the amount of characters and even the whole game down to a manageable size for our small team, the 12 people, was, I think, by far the biggest challenge we had during the development. We, for example, had multiple outcomes at the end of each level. You could fail to turn your family members back to humans, and they would drown in their own ocean of tears. It still like pains me that we needed to cut this, but merely managed to finalize the game in its boiled down version even. So we had to make sacrifices a lot during the production to be able to finish Sea of Solitude. The learning curve we had been extreme. Even near to half of the production, we cut like big parts of the game, as we for the first time saw how much work it takes to bring even one mechanic to a quality level so it would not break the immersion for the player. Calculating the time frame and scope of the development so poorly, it was nearly what brought the whole production to fail, to be honest. That was a really big thing for us. We were spending much time to bring too many ideas to life and seeing too late that it takes so much more to polish them. You can still see it in the game now that it's released. Several mechanics are not polished enough and feel a bit clumsy maybe. Okay, so back to K's manifested core emotions. Self-destruction. In the first minute of the game, we see the most prominent emotion of K at that time, portrayed as a huge creature swimming underwater. The monster we see is self-destruction, and the main antagonist of K. It looks like a mixture of K and a shark in search for the next victim. Up to this point, this has been K's only monster at the start of the game. It's so overwhelming that there was no room for any other feeling. She is pure self-destruction at the start of the game. We hear Kay's voice contemplating about her life, feeling incredibly lonely, but also being tired of this situation and that she wants to change. The moment she says it out loud, I want to change, Kay finally, like her other emotions finally start to emerge again. So this is when the game starts. self-destruction vanished out of the screen, and we see our playable character, the dark K with red eyes, waking up in a tiny boat in the middle of a storm-ridden night on an endless ocean. The ocean of her own tears she shed for way too long. While Kay tries to escape the sea of tears, self-destruction feels home in it, swimming in it elegantly like an ancient guardian. Throughout the game, self-destruction is a constant threat. The game takes place in flooded Berlin, my chosen hometown. Water everywhere, which means self-destruction is lurking behind every corner, just one step away from eating Kay and drowning her again in her own ocean of tears. Kay's task is to avoid self-destruction at all costs at the beginning. When humans are in a certain state of mind for a longer time, it becomes like their home for them, even when it is a destructive feeling, like self-doubt, anger, or being too much used to drinking alcohol or other destructive behavior. To get out of this, we all need to withstand it for a while until it doesn't feel like home anymore. So mechanically, our self-destruction is a primitive entity that patrols in the water, it's blocking the path, the player has to wait until it is far away and then has to swim as fast as they can to the next rooftop or dry area. You encounter her early in the game. In the first place, the player has to swim in order to progress. At this point, the player might not even know that they can actually swim in the game. Some players, when we tested the game, some players were even afraid of stepping in the water at all for quite a long while until they needed to go that way because there was no other way. It was really interesting to watch our testers back in the days. So self-destruction cost us the most time to create. As you can see it now in the game, when we built the first prototype back in 2015, 2016, we only had a small part of environment, a few houses compared to the whole city district in the final game. Back then, we could let self-destruction behave like a train. When K touches the water, we could spawn the monster in a certain distance where it had a clear path to attack K straight on. In the final game, we had so many houses, chimneys underwater, obstacles in general, that the spawning and train-like attack wouldn't work at all anymore, as the space was often so small for self-destruction. So we needed to build a complex AI, including navmesh and patrolling behavior. We needed to come up with solutions to make self-destruction always fast enough to actually be a threat to the player, no matter how far away self-destruction had been while patrolling. Suddenly, the behavior was so complex that we needed 2 programmers working on it full time, which left us only 3 more programmers for all the other aspects of the game. Other early prototypes like self-destruction, ramming against buildings to push K into the water, we needed to completely abandon, as the patrolling alone was so much work. Joy is the second manifested emotion you meet in Sea of Solitude, and she doesn't appear monstrous at all for now. Right after Kay woke up in her boat at the beginning of the game, you just see one tiny point of interest in the distance on the stormy dark ocean. It's joy, shining bright as a little dot far away. Metaphorically, this stands for the feeling when you make a decision to change something in your life. The idea itself to finally change brings us joy again, even if it's just for a little while. In reality, it is often a long road to really make that change lasting. That is why Kay is unable to touch joy throughout the whole game, up until shortly before the end. Major spoiler. Sorry. So Joy's appearance is Kay as a child, but in a yellow raincoat, invulnerable to the ocean of tears. In my first concept, I wanted to let Joy run over the water like Jesus, but with an already huge workload for the programmers and animators, we cut that idea and just let her fly through the air. Even though I tried to avoid like this fairy tale-like aspects in Sea of Solitude, I tried to have that not at all. Like flying entities, like a flying little girl. But we couldn't do it otherwise because of the work amount. So mechanically, Joy serves as a guide in the beginning, literally as a beacon in the distance. Once the player meets her, they immediately get a feeling what emotion she's supposed to be. She has a cheerful and playful nature and wants to be helpful. She gives Kay the sunny weather that surrounds the boat and functions as a transportable safe zone. The sunny weather is like around the boat, like, and she also gives, like, Joy also gives Kay a flair that continues to guide the player if they are unsure where to go next. So when you press a button, you can create a flare that is flying out of your hand to the next point of interest. But Joy disappears rather abruptly, rather fast, because in such situations in real life, surrounded by self-destruction and self-doubt, there is little room for joy to be found. So to be honest, we had Joy appearing much more often in the game at first, but we needed to cut it again due to the overload of work we had with Sea of Solitude and whole. So at the end we put Joy just as an introduction to each level, which fits in a great way. So additionally, if you listen carefully to what Joy says in the game, you are able to figure out that Joy is not healthy either. Her main motivation is to find Jack, Kay's boyfriend. Everything Joy does is to get quicker to him. Like everyone in Sea of Solitude, Joy changes over the course of the game. When the player reaches the level where they actually meet the boyfriend monster of Kay, Joy turns bitter towards Kay and completely obsessive towards the boyfriend. As I was in real life, Kay is also a people pleaser, we call that. She loves to fix other people's problems in order to not have to think about her own issues. And the boyfriend has so many issues that Kay makes it her sole mission to fix him. And one way to portray that is by turning joy into obsession. Mechanically, Joy stops being the guide and starts being an enemy, trying to hinder Kay to get closer to the boyfriend monster. And Joy wants the boyfriend monster all for herself. Eventually, through the tough breakup and the time afterwards in the game where Kay finds fulfillment with herself, obsession turns back into joy, and Kay can finally fully embrace her. So both joy and obsession, I wanted to look more ambiguous and creepy at the beginning, like by distorting the outer form. But as you see, it's not the case. Even though we had Electronic Arts as a publisher for Sea of Solitude, we still didn't have the money to employ a full-time special effects artist. So everyone in our team who knew a little bit about special effects needed to do some special effects in the game. So sadly, there was no time to do all the many special effects ideas I wanted to have in the game, especially for Joy and Obsession. We didn't have time, but maybe it's also a lucky coincidence, and it also serves the aesthetic of Sea of Solitude, that we don't have that many special effects, and that it had more of, I say, a dry, grounded look, which comes from less special effects. But for our next projects, I want to finally have my very own special effects artist. Okay. So now we come to self-doubt. Self-doubt is one of the favorites since the first trailer. She is a third emotion you meet in Sea of Solitude. She is the one standing in Kay's way and the way of the player, and makes an appearance in each level. She is a voice in your head telling you in the beginning, like, that you are a worthless piece of shit. Sorry, that you are worthless and you should just give up. But as scary as this huge monster seems, it's also vulnerable, and it's hiding in its fragile shell. If that shell is broken, self-doubt will try and hide to find a new shell. Mechanically, self-doubt is a classic lock and key mechanic. She is a huge house-high monster, looking like a mixture between Kay and a snail, and hiding in its own house. She dives out of the ocean between houses and stops the player from progressing. The player has to reroute and find ways to make self-doubt vanish. Finding corrupted versions of Kay, turning into figures of light, emitting light, as you see in the screenshots. And this light has to be turned towards self-doubt, towards, and this is metaphorically, this stands for self-reflection. Kay is like literally contemplating with herself, torn between thinking badly about herself, but also feeling that she is worthy of love and a good life. It's like a form of therapy you see in the game there. Each time the player has such a conversation with self-doubt, self-doubt gets smaller and smaller. When we first met self-doubt, the self-doubt monster, she is like insulting Kay in a cruel manner. But step by step, she turns into a healthy doubt. Like, she turns from self-doubt into healthy doubt, and in a more manageable size and a more friendly tone. Instead of insulting Kay, she starts giving actually good advice of caution, which Kay chooses to ignore for a long time. One of the early designs of self-doubt, or one of the early design decisions for Sea of Solitude had been to not have fights in the game, to not fight. I don't want to have that. But how do you fight your self-doubt without fighting? We had like multiple crazy ideas. One was doing like a capoeira, like dance with yourself on the back of self-destruction while it swims through the ocean of tears. Like, we have really a lot of too crazy ideas. But one of our main goals had been to use as few buttons as possible to play Sea of Solitude. And this capoeira dance prototype showed that it would need like the opposite, like a lot of buttons. So fighting self-doubt by reflecting your own behavior seemed also fitting. So we built that complex mirror system where you had to reflect like a light beam several times, like through the street canyons, until it hit Self-Doubt's shell. The design idea sadly came after we already had the level design almost finished. So no matter how much we tried, it felt like a plaster, not really fitting on the wound. Like so I hope that is understandable, that we had all the level design already done, and then we came up with this cool mirror mechanic for Self-Doubt, and it was way too late because we couldn't change the level design much anymore. It was not a good development cycle. So at the end, we kept it simple and took the idea of shedding light onto self-doubt and arguing with yourself, step by step, stopping yourself from putting yourself down with words. So also the appearance of Kay barely changed during the development. It was an interesting quest to find out who she actually is, Kay, our main character. We wanted the character to be new to the world, but also portray the feelings and thoughts of Kay. So as mentioned at the beginning, I was living through my own journey in real life while writing it down and creating the game from it. So at the beginning, I didn't even knew that I had issues at all. So Kay was rather blank at the beginning, and mainly the character that helped everyone else with her issues, or with their issues, I'm sorry. So during the whole production of Sea of Solitude, I went to a psychoanalysis. This step by step opened my eyes that the issue itself, wanting to help others so much, was a symptom of other issues I had to solve. So no matter how hard life seemed, the only thing I always had was immense willpower. So this is why we choose the emotion willpower as our main character, moving forward no matter what. So all of Kay's manifested emotions seem to know Kay already in the game, but Kay doesn't seem to know them, as if they are separate people. The entire game happens in Kay's mind. They are all one person. Visually, her loneliness turned to the outside, but she is on the journey to become healthy. That is why she still looks more human than, for example, the brother monster we talk about soon. Yeah, and then there is the boat. I hope you can see it in the screenshot. The boat represents the hope of Kay. It serves as a safe zone for the player. When Kay is in the boat, self-destruction cannot hurt her. When she is far away from the boat, it emits a light, so Kay can always find her way back to the boat. Without the boat, Kay is more vulnerable to the dangers of the world. The lack of safety creates an interesting bond between player and boat, as they really feel, the players often really felt relieved when they finally came back to the boat after being separated for a long time from it. When Kay travels through our world, she carries a backpack with her. It represents the baggage we all carry throughout our life. In the game, the player encounters enemies and objects, is harassed by dark thoughts and negative emotions. We call that corruption. The corruption, as you see there, sticks to the things Kay needs to move. Kay needs to move forward. So the only way to get past these things, these corruptions, you have to raise your hand and like suck this corruption into your backpack, into your baggage. It sounds easy enough, but comes at a high price for Kay. Kay doesn't really cope with this negative emotions. So every corruption cleared, like sucked into her backpack, makes the backpack grow and grow. At the end of the game, the backpack is so full that it's almost completely occludes Kay. It's really big, and at the end, it finally bursts. Kay has a breakdown at that point, and from that moment on, she is forced to cope with all those negative emotions she beforehand put into her backpack. In the end, Kay is alone. Nobody left to cling on anymore. Alone in a tower without her backpack, surrounded by all the bad thoughts circling around her. The only one left is self-destruction, still trying to eat her, still. And while Kay climbs up this tower, completely alone and lost, the thought of being devoured by self-destruction again is more tempting than ever before. One by one, the other parts of Kay join her again. Joy regain control over her senses, no longer obsessed with the boyfriend Jack, and helping Kay by carrying the corruptions for her, the bad thoughts, and distract self-destruction. Because after such a storm, allowing yourself to feel joy again in real life, like feel joy again, even for a little while, takes the burden off and makes it a little easier to move on. This is how we came up with a game mechanic. The former self-doubt, by now healthy doubt, blocks the path, but she is apologizing for stopping Kay beforehand. And Kay begins to understand that the doubts were there to only try to protect her from certain pain. So you see in this chapter that Kay starts to trust her doubts finally, that sometimes it's important to have doubts. Together, the parts of Kay are the last threshold. They come to the conclusion that doubt must be sacrificed to self-destruction. The result of that is that the doubts regarding self-destructive tendencies balance each other out. So both of them become smaller. After this, all of Kay's parts are almost the same size. In a cathartic and heartwarming moment, they share and embrace each other and Kay. So they finally cry together and hug each other, and that makes them melt to the human Kay. So what we see then, after they all hug and merge, is the human Kay. But that means that none of the emotions beforehand have vanished or get killed off. Joy, self-destruction, and doubt are all part of Kay still, of the human Kay. The goal is to bring all your emotions into balance. And this is what Kay accomplishes. That last part of the game was complex, or was the most complex and draining part to develop. because I lived through the story in real life, like mentioned, while we developed the game, and I wasn't in real life at the point of enlightenment in my life when we needed to start to develop that part. That was really crazy. So we worked the end pretty often, and thankfully I reached my own well-being before the end of the game production, so we could create a fitting final in the game. It was really crazy. Um, but it all came to a high price with Sea of Solitude. Nearly like every mechanic we had in the last part was unique and new. We're starting to develop new mechanics almost on the finishing line of the development. That is a big no-go. And it's honestly like a miracle almost that we somehow still finished the game on time. I have to be honest. So we learned from that to never do it this way again. To never come up with new game ideas that late in development time. To never like write a story about while you're living through that story in real life. That is like too much hassle. But for Sea of Solitude, it seemed inevitable, because of the unique nature that it drew so much from my real life that happened at the same time as a game's development. So now I talk about the family members. Sunny is a young red-headed boy and Kay's brother. The fans of Sea of Solitude love him, but he has a couple of friends who don't. In fact, in the game, they harass him, hurt him, and destroy his self-esteem. And we see Sunny in the first level. So while Sunny sits in his class just waiting for school to be over, he watches birds outside, imagining to simply fly away from all his troubles caused by his so-called friends, which are his bullies. And this is what happens. He becomes a raven-like, as you see in the creature in the screenshot. He becomes a raven-like creature surrounded by a foggy weather, trying to always fly away and hide. An important part of this section of the game is, of course, the enemy design. This was an interesting process in development. Our goal was to make the player feel what the character feels. And to really feel with Sunny, we needed the player to feel bullied. In our team, there are people for whom this topic isn't new. So in terms of narrative design, it wasn't too hard to come up with the right words to say. Mechanically, however, it was a thin line between being too frustrated and too easy. At first, we made the bullies spawn and attack randomly if they moved, which translates to the feeling of bullies. Unwarranted attacks just for existing. Like just because Sunny existed, his bullies wanted to torture him. But a game needs to be fair and should not be frustrating. So we finally came up with groups of bullies, like standing in the way or following the player and pushing them if they came too close to the enemies. It shows the feeling just as well, we figured out, but gives the player a way to outsmart the bullies, like that they have to keep their distance and run around. But we make the player walk through the entire school of Sunny, while the memories of what happened to Sunny play in the background. And the combination of those two things created one of our strongest emotional landscapes, especially the last room where it's so dark you can barely see. Kay is shaking and the bullies tower over you. Yeah, it was really intense. After the player goes through this, then Sunny flies away. We create a motivation to follow and help him. This is also the first time Kay realizes that this monster is her brother. And the moment guilt overcomes her because she wasn't there for him, shocked that she didn't notice her brother transition into this lonely creature. A common pattern of bullies is when a group of people come into an age where group dynamic become more important, like when you're turning 12, 13, 14, this age, and cliques and groups are usually formed around common interests and similarities. Leadership roles, power and social standing become more important. In such cases, the victim is often someone who is different. This could be an unusual hobby, the person could just be shy, or even their hair color could be an issue if it's different. So often adults are clueless or look away, while the victims of bullying look for the fault within them. And it was with Sunny or for Sunny. But now that Kay finally knows, she does everything in her power to help her brother. And it actually works because now his suffering is actually acknowledged, and he receives support. Like she is telling him that it was not right to be treated that way, that these are no jokes and no friends. As friends and family, just to mention, it is important to listen closely if your loved one seems to suffer. We have to take it seriously and offer support. So this is how Sunny turns back to a human. It's just because Kay listens to him and offers support. That alone is something that is strengthening the victim of bullying. We also show loneliness in relationships with the parents. We brought the family into a toxic. The parents brought the family into a toxic situation by being in a relationship that isn't meant to be for way too long. Means they stayed together for the kids to protect them and to sustain an image of a healthy family to the outside, but that actually ended up hurting the entire family. At the end, in the game, in the second level, they separate. They separate, divorce, and teach their children a healthy lesson of how to let go. Let's start with Vivian, the Kay's mother's monster, the mother monster, we call it. So when Kay's mother was a young woman, she met a man who appeared as if he would do anything for her. Wants the same thing, a family. He's called Adam, the father of Kay. And he told Vivian very early on that he wants kids, but in reality, he wasn't ready for it. They fell in love with each other and rushed into it. While they were in different stages of the relationship. When they had Kay, when they had Kay at the baby, Adam started to work more and more and disappeared for longer periods of time. Vivian started to become more clingy, the mother, trying everything to keep the father around from trying to support him and trying to keep him in the family by buying a house for the whole family. So the mother surprises the father with a new house. She in the game, the mother becomes a huge octopus monster, like emerging from the sea of loneliness, like grasping with her tentacles towards the father monster, with huge arms, while the father monster is becoming a chameleon-like creature, hiding on top of a skyscraper out of the reach of that mother monster. So Vivian, the mother, is at the end of her patience. She simply cannot cope with the problems of her children. So even when her daughter tells her about the worries Kay has, the mother shuts down or gets angry. This is not only present in the memories that can be revisited in the game, but also shows in how the octopus behaves when she meets Kay for the first time. But when Kay approaches, she sees Joy singing with the octopus mother, like the Joy part, and relaxing on the arms of the mother monster. But when Kay comes close, the part that is now reflecting and questioning how things are, she snaps. The octopus monster, the mother monster, grabs the boat and throws it to the father monster, like to the skyscraper, as if she wants to say, if you need something, why don't you go to him, to your father, and talk to him? So approaching the chameleon, the father monster, to solve the issues is not easier than approaching the mother monster. And it's a hard climb to go through this tentacle-battered building, while the father's screams are stopping Kay from progressing. When he screams, he creates like huge waves that push back Kay, and even when Kay reaches the top of the skyscrapers and offers her help, the father monster refuses to talk, and the entire building collapses. Adam, Kay's father, always trying to avoid conflicts. That is his personality. It also means that he tries to avoid touching the water, the ocean of tears, at all costs. While Vivian, the mother monster, is always at least half underwater because she constantly deals with these heavy emotions. So Adam even almost drowns when he touches the water for the first time because he is unable to deal with this. Ultimately, what we witness is a constant fight between two people in this second level who are pushing and pulling. They stayed together, the parents stayed together when they should have broken up. Sustaining the relationship helped no one. So what it took was a collapsing skyscraper, a lot of harsh words, and the parents witnessing their own daughter doing everything she can until Kay, the daughter, collapses right in front of them because of this whole hustle. To realize that they have to be there, that the parents have to be there for their child, for Kay, and not the other way around. So they need to stop fighting and figure out what to do without hurting their children. And just to mention, this level is this arc, the story is not based on my real life, but it came from many different co-workers. So we all talked about different stories or things that happened in our life, and I put it together and wrote a whole game. So my parents are still happily married for over 40 years, but it was important to show a type of loneliness in relationships with these level. Okay, in the last chapters of the game, we feature a magnificent white wolf, the beautiful monster, if you will. Jack is a charismatic young man who is generally liked by everyone, which is mirrored by his perfect appearance as a monster. So he is actually the boyfriend of Kay. But sometimes in real life, if we're not really well, we still act as if we are well and put on a smile. We camouflage ourselves. So this is what we show with this white wolf appearance, like a camouflage to appear fine. But when Kay touches the wolf, a large part of his camouflage, of his white wolf appearance, breaks off his face and reveals that there is the black dog beneath it, depression. The relationship between Jack and Kay is not sustainable. He suffers, but puts on this mask and hides his insecurities and seems confident instead of dealing with his issues and get better. He doesn't do that. The water that stands for loneliness and sadness turned to ice and snow around him. It is clearly there, surrounding and mantling him, but the cold also makes him numb to it, to the ocean of tears. Being around that person, Kay developed the thought that he is the only thing that matters, and that it is her purpose to fix him, and that her happiness depends on him being there, and she becomes obsessive about it. Them being together, like Jack and Kay being together, clearly has a negative consequence, as each time when they touch in the game, another part of Jack's camouflage breaks off, and painfully, new new manifestations of the obsession of joy, the joy creeps come up and surrounding him. Still, with all that, Kay wants to repair that white shell that makes her boyfriend so perfect. So in the game, you go to this pieces that break off of the boyfriend monster, like this, and carry these pieces and try to get it back to the black dog and attach it again. So this is what she tries to do all the time until she loses those shards, those pieces. In the end, Jack makes it impossible for Kay to follow him anymore, as he remains like underwater while the Sea of Solitude rises and flushes Kay upwards. Her having like that, and she starts to having a breakdown. So just to mention, the boyfriend monster is the only monster in the game that you don't turn into a human. The brother, like I talked before, Sunny, it turns into a human. The parents turn into humans at the end of their level, but Jack is not turning into a human. He has to figure this out all on his own too, same as Kay. So Jack was undecided whether he wants to be with Kay or not. His mental health issues so prevented him from being in a healthy relationship. His decisions to ultimately end the relationship was his first step on his own journey, as mentioned. He is, as mentioned, the only one who is not turning into a human. But only after the credits rolls, now in major spoiler again, we see like a little dark male figure on a deep blue sea, opening his eyes in a boat that looks the same as Kay's boat. This is hinting that Jack now is starting his own journey in his own Sea of Solitude. Okay. I think what makes our monster design and our premise, our core, when humans get too lonely, they turn into monsters, so strong, and created such a pull during the development and during the release, is that you hear the sentence and realize that monsters are manifestations of their specific type of loneliness. You start asking yourself questions as a player. What is my struggle, for example, or how would my monster look like? Those questions and the fact that most of the players had similar experiences or have heard the things before that we say in the game, resulted in the players reflecting themselves. Hundreds of people of fans contacted me after the release of the game, thanking me, telling me their stories. I could tell you incredible stories about our fans, how Sea of Solitude changed their life. And I'm so very grateful for that. So in the end, what we did was showing the player a series of unhealthy relationships or coping mechanisms to show people that the typical ways of avoiding to deal with your mental health and unsustainable situations is resulting in dysfunction. The most positive outcome of the game was that some people felt less alone, felt inspired to embark in their own journey in the Sea of Solitude and to heal themselves, to go to therapy for the first time in their lives. And my hope is that they will all find their way out and bring their emotions into balance. Okay, so I'm done with my presentation. It was quite longer than expected. I'm so sorry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I think it was quite interesting. We collected some questions in the meantime. So I will actually first start with, as we are a film festival, and there is a lot of film script writers listening to our industry events usually, and now we are in a way interested in gaming. What is actually our first question is writing a script for a film is quite different from writing for a video game.
Yes.
Can you compare it to writing to comics? I know that you started your career working for comic series. And can you compare it in terms of one storyline and multiple choices?
One thing first, should I stop my sharing and that I come up the screen, or is it fine the way it is?
It's fine, however you prefer it, yeah.
It's fine, it's fine. So the question was if I can compare like writing for games, comparing to writing for comics?
Yes, exactly. I mean, in terms of one storyline and multiple choices, so maybe it can be similar comparison to writing to films and writing to video games.
Yes, so there are, of course, many different kinds of video games, and we are story driven and we want to tell a specific story. it is a kind of linear writing. And as I mentioned beforehand during the presentation, was that we had multiple endings at the beginning. We multiple choices that we could let the brother, for example, drown in the ocean, in his ocean of tears. But it is also a matter of how much manpower you have. So when I was writing for comics, in my opinion, it's a lot easier maybe, but I don't want to say anything negative, but in a positive way, because you have this clear construction of panels and sides, and in beginning and an end. And in games, the player has so much freedom to explore, even though we have a linear story. They still have so much freedom to explore that you need to make sure that the pacing, you can never be completely sure what kind of pacing the player will have to go through the story. So at this end, that we have this open worldish appearance, though, that they can explore and find little notes. So it is a bit different, I fear, because the information, the story beats come sometimes in different what is called in different places. That one little story beat first and the other. So you have to be more flexible. I think film and comic for film and comic it's easier to write. I would say that, because it's a clear construction. Yeah, this is how
Thank you. Then, was it problem to find the financing? How did you find the investors? And how many people did you pitch the game before you were able to develop it?
So when we before we pitched the game to anyone, we posted GIFs in 2015, little GIFs on social media, on Twitter, on something, and the feedback, the journalists, the fans, the feedback was so immense that big magazines like Rock Paper Shotgun and Eurogamer, and they all started to write about Sea of Solitude just because of those little GIFs we had for the game. And because of this increasing, that the people started to get to know Sea of Solitude more and more, publishers started to approach us, which was a pretty unique situation. So we had our first publishers who wanted to publish the game, but those publishers at the beginning all had not enough money because we had a very ambitious game, as you can see, game idea. So we started at some point to pitch the game to several publishers. And there, of course, I can mention Electronic Arts, but there had been other major publisher, like in the category of Electronic Arts, almost, if that is possible, that wanted to publish Sea of Solitude 2. So they competed against each other. So Electronic Art made us an offer, then the other publisher made us a better offer, and it's still the craziest thing to remember that like so many at the end. I think it boiled down to 2, but 5 of the bigger ones were talking about Sea of Solitude or wanting to publish it. It was incredible to see that they had all this huge interest in such a small indie game. So this is how, if you want to know it in a bit more in detail, we got an agency at some point, because my co-founder and me, we are very artistic. And we don't know about the whole marketing and business side so much. everything that's necessary we know, but not like the high quality that how to go to a publisher and pitch to it, and no. So we got an agency that was started to help us with lawyer stuff, contracts, and they also gave us some pitch of the most important pitches, that they connected us with Electronic Arts, for example. Yeah, I could talk on.
This was actually the next question. How did you manage to get published by them, by Electronic Arts? But obviously the agency helped, and this great beginning also. How's Jo-Mei doing? How many people do you have employed now? And was it a huge jump before and after the game?
Okay. Just to mention, yeah. Okay, then let's talk about this. I wanted to talk about Electronic Arts some more, but so how is Jo-Mei doing? So after we released ZFF Solitude, we were all almost burned out. I have to be honest, because it was so exhausting. It was so much fun to create ZFF Solitude, but when you jump from making such small games like free-to-play games to such a big game published by EA, who has also a high standard, and with such a small team, we all worked. We didn't crunch, but we worked a lot, and mainly like with passion. So at the end, our energy was all gone. We took quite some time where we didn't work that much, and we boiled our company down to half the size, because many of the employees we didn't need it anymore. We used like a full-time animator, for example. So we boiled it down to the core people we still needed for our next projects we slowly came up with. So programmers and the core team. And now, after over a year, we slowly have energy again to fully work on the new games. So you can see how long it took to regain like energy again. And I heard that from many indie developers, even though we are not indie really, right? We have a publisher, but like independent developers, let's say that, smaller developers, that they are drained after they create such a game, because it's so emotional and so involving, and many independent smaller developer puts their heart into it and work non-stop. So now we have energy again, and we're working on new games.
Can you tell us a little bit about the new game, or is it still a secret?
I think I don't know if Patrick wants to say something, but I think my producer better maybe not for now. Patrick, producer, say something.
No, it's too early. I mean, we for sure we will continue the way we did with ZFF Solitude. We want to do. We want to tell a story again. We want to do emotional stuff, but it's too early to say.
Okay, we'll be waiting. We are still receiving the questions. Let me read another one. Were you inspired by other works of fiction, maybe games or literature?
Yes. Point. Yes, there were many. Artistically, of course, Studio Ghibli. I think many people know Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away. Artistically, I was always inspired by Japanese manga and Japanese animation, cartoons. But gameplay-wise and emotionally, one of the first inspirations was strangely Silent Hill. I don't know how many people know Silent Hill, but for me, it's still like the first, and maybe Patrick can even talk more about it, because he's a huge fan. that portray mental states in such a metaphorical way. It's still incredible, the Silent Hill series. Patrick?
Not all of them, but I think most people talk about mainly the first and the second, like probably the second. Like I think there's so much people that wrote about the second one, where they put like the whole Silent Hill thing is a metaphor, which is a world where people get dragged into, and then in the world are kind of like fighting their demons or have to deal with consequences of their own actions. And so, yeah, I think it was back then, it was pretty unique. I don't think many games came close to that. At some point, it got more commercial, like from Silent Hill 3 on, and who knows? There's a rumor there will be a new one from Sony. But yeah, that was the influence, and like Connie said, Ghibli from the beginning for the color code and everything. There was something that is really close to her heart.
Yeah. So yeah, it's strange, right? Because it's such a crazy horror game, but it still has some.
It is horror. I mean, it's on the outside, on the surface, it's a horror game, but inside, it's much more about. I mean, in the second game, you play a guy, and his wife died, and he got this invitation from her to the town of Silent Hill, and you know she's dead, and he still got the letter, and he goes there knowing that it can't be right. So it's something in his head, or so it's like, yeah, it's deep stuff.
Horror. Okay. So yes, but of course, like other independent games like Firewatch, Journey, those kind of What Remains of Edith Finch, Gone Home, all those story-driven games or aesthetic art games, those are huge inspirations. This high-quality independent games, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, well connected to the things that you were mentioning before. The question is, were you worried whether the monsters would be relatable to players before you tested?
No, I'm never worried. Okay. No. Actually, I actually wasn't worried. I just wanted to express myself artistically. So this was maybe a bit egoistic, but as many artists do, that they in music or in films or whatever, in books, that they want to express their emotions. And so this is what I wanted to do. So I didn't care that much if everybody can relate. I just wanted to show the world what I'm feeling and hope that a lot of people could relate. But I was never worried that nobody could relate, because I already had many friends and family members and other people where I knew that when I talked with them about the monsters, that they said, "Oh my God, self-doubt! It's like me." Like I'm hiding in a shell and talking badly about myself all the time. So no, we at this point, the story I never worried about. It was the gameplay that was the point where I was worrying. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I think we can slowly go towards the end. I actually have the last question, which is, do you sense any effects of the pandemic? How is the industry affected?
So, two parts. At one hand, it's really nice to work from home for a while. I have to be honest, because of the lockdown, we closed our studio rooms, office, and everybody is working from home. So it is so nice when you had such a stressful years of Solitude development, and then suddenly you can work from home. So this is a positive side, to start with positive things. But the negative side is that we see that investors taking much longer to be honest, because they also can't travel, and investors need to travel all the time to talk with their clients, and so money is an issue. At the same time, it's also a positive thing because the German government supports studios with COVID money. So also we got also money, and so this is a point that has ups and downs. But I slowly see that I'm not that efficient anymore as when I'm in the studio with all my people, because when you're sitting between other people that are working, you also have a drive to work, and you can just go to the next table and talk with them. But when you're waking up like in the bed and going into the kitchen where I'm sitting here all day and have to be energetic for yourself, or being, you know what I mean? Get energy for yourself. It's hard. So I hear that from quite many developers, that at some points they are not that efficient anymore. I think we all have that. It's not only game development. So it's ups and downs. Did I told everything that is important? I hope, Patrick. Yeah.
I think the biggest point for the industry is that, I mean, if you talk to like publishers or distributors, it's usually you have to meet them in person. You're not asking someone to invest in your game if you not even had like one chance to sit on a table. And that became really difficult this year. I mean, the good thing for us, like we had a lot of connections already, so we were able to like sort out a lot of stuff with Zoom calls, but it's still not the same. And for the other stuff, I'm completely agree with Connie. Like I was the first one coming back into the empty office since like at home it's harder. It's my cat always tries to drag me away from doing emails and stuff, and so for me actually it was a good exercise in summer to go back into the office, even there was nobody here. But now we're kind of used to it, and we'll see like how fast it's going back to kind of normal.
We hope we will go back very soon and not just get used to this, but we'll see. Thank you very much.
We need more areas to do emotional games. So if it's not going back to normal, we can do a lot of emotional games.
Right.
I completely agree.
I hope you will use this very well, because obviously there is a lot of material in this 2020. Thank you very much for this lecture and for the Q&A. We are looking forward to your game, and I'm sure that our audience is also. I hope we will do this again, and that next time you will be live in Zagreb presenting your new game.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming. Well, that's it. I hope the audience will follow us also tomorrow, when we are also having a gaming event discussing European co-productions in games. That was it for today. Thank you for following. See you tomorrow. Bye.